Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard. Tonight we're going to be learning about Parshat Chukat. Parshat Chukat begins, Zot Chukat Torah. This is the chok of the Torah. What is a chok? A chok is a type of law that at least seemingly defies logic, supersedes logic, transcends logic. In other words, it's far from obvious, and it's involved very much with paradox. And there are many things in this parsha. We would need many hours, but Moshe hitting the rock, and because of that, not going into Eretz Yisrael, Miriam dies, Aaron dies, the incident with the fiery snakes. There are many incidences in this parsha that strain the logic to understand them. We're going to be looking at a different angle here, and that is of parable. Because in this parsha, along with having the type of law that supersedes logic, and at times even defies logic, seemingly defies logic, at least human logic, God has his logic, is also the parsha is full of symbolism, parable, allegory, metaphor. And as we'll see, this is true of the whole Torah, but this particular parsha is full of these ideas. So we're going to concentrate on the idea of parable. Why would we concentrate on parable? For those who have Fruits of the Orchard, you can look on page 418, that after Miriam dies, the water disappears. And from this, we learn that in her merit, we had water in the desert. Then a number of things happen, and then Israel sings a song. It's one of the 10 archetypal songs sung throughout history. It's a very short song, and it is in Bamidbar, chapter 21, verses 17 and 18. And it just says like this, I'll read it in English. Come up, O well, meaning a well of water, and announce it. The well that the princes dug, that the nobles of the people dug, through a lawgiver with their staff, a gift from the wilderness. So on the surface, it sounds like it's talking about a well of water. But we have an idea, and that's true. It's totally true. But as we'll see in a second, what follows, they understood that this is actually a parable, and the water being talked about here is the Torah itself. And the lawgiver who dug the well, this is Moshe. And so we have a principle in the Talmud that says, Ein mayim ela Torah. Anytime that the word water, the concept of water appears in the Torah, it's an allusion, a hint to Torah itself. So the sages understood that this song is happening really on two levels at the same time. It is a song of thanksgiving, of acknowledgement for water in the desert. Water in the desert is not a given, especially when you have literally millions of people who need to drink. But also it's a parable for water. So the song ends, a gift from the wilderness. And so the Torah continues and says like this, from Midbar to Matana. And the simple understanding is these are names of places, that they traveled from the desert to a place called Matana, from Matana to Nachliel, from Nachliel to Bamot, and from Bamot to Haggai. in the field of Moab, at the top of the peak overlooking the surface of Yeshimon. So again, on the simple literal understanding, it sounds like this is a travelogue. They went from this place to this place to this place to this place. But one of the greatest sages, Rava, explains this whole thing is a parable. These are not necessarily names of places. They're names of concepts. So what is the concept, as Rava explains? So what is the gift from the wilderness in this song? The gift is the Torah that was received in the desert of Sinai. From the Midbar, now we're told that we received the Torah in the desert because it represents humbleness. The desert is very stark, it's seemingly empty. It represents lowliness of spirit, not in a negative way, just existential understanding of our position vis-a-vis an infinite creator. So from the Midbar to Matana, when we have that kind of attitude, then the Torah is given to us as a gift. And from Matana, which means a gift, they went to Nachliel. Nachliel, a Nachala, means an inheritance. So when we have lowly, humble spirit, and we're able to receive the Torah as a gift, it becomes our inheritance. It becomes we come to own the Torah in a sense. And from Nachliel, they went to Bamot. Bamot literally means a high place, an elevated top of the mountain. So we're told that when Torah becomes our inheritance, it raises us up to the, as it were, the top of the mountain. But if we're at the top of the mountain and we become prideful, look how much Torah I know, look how wise I've become. Then from Bamot to Haggai, Haggai means a low valley. Then we're like knocked off of our pedestal because of our overblown ego and pride. And we end up in the valley by the field of Moab. So this is how Rava explains this is a parable. He explains this as a parable. And then the parsha continues. There are many things that happen in this parsha. And one of the things is we end up fighting the king of Sichon. And the Torah says like this. It says, this is in Bamidbar, chapter 21, verse 27. It says, concerning this, meaning this place called Sichon, those who speak in parables said the following: come to Cheshbon, may it be built and established as the city of Sichon. Cheshbon is actually the word in modern Hebrew for mathematics. And spiritually, there's a concept called Cheshbon HaNefesh, making an accounting of the soul, soul searching. But here, what I want to point out, it says, those who speak in parables said the following about Sichon. Now, Rashi says, who are these people who are talking about parables? He says, Bilam. That is the next parsha that we'll be learning. In Parshat Balak, the prophet of the nations, Bilam, who is a magician and a sorcerer, was hired by Balak to curse the Jews. And throughout the parsha, 4, 5, 6 times, he says parables, and it's in the language of parables. He wants to curse the Jews, but it turns out that he blesses the Jews because that's how God forced him, is to bless the Jewish people and not curse them. But the point is, over and over again, Bilam is attempting to curse the Jews, and he gives it over in parable form. So here in the same portion, which is called Zot Chukat Torah, this is the paradox of the Torah. That's the whole idea of the paraduma. How is it that this ritual, which purifies someone from the impurity of death, those who administer the ritual become impure, and the ones who are impure become pure? And this is what's called the paradox of the Torah. How is it that the same elements, the same materials that are going to be put together to purify someone, those who are putting them together become impure? This is called the paradox of the Torah. So it's very significant that this whole idea of parable also shows up in this parsha. And so here we can understand the whole concept of pardes. Here we're learning fruits of the orchard. Well, what is the orchard? The orchard is the pardes. And this is 4 different levels of learning: Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat is the literal storyline of the Torah. The Remez is the hinted to or allusions in the Torah, of which there are many, many, many. And then the Drush is the allegory, the symbolism, metaphor, and parable of the Torah. And the Sod, the Samach of Pardes, is the mystical, what we now call the Kabbalistic level of learning the Torah. And so here we see that paradox and symbolism, parable and metaphor, they're all happening in every verse of the Torah. But there is something special about this parsha because it's like packed full of these different allegories and metaphors and parables and paradoxes. So what's interesting to point out is that Rashi, the most classic commentator on the Chumash, not the only one, but what would we do without Rashi? So Rashi says of himself, he says, I have only come to explain the literal meaning of the text. Rashi says it about himself, and it's in one of the Rashis in the Chumash. But we have an amazing thing. If you learn Rashi, you'll see that, I don't know the percentage, I'm just throwing out a number, but probably half of everything that Rashi explains is coming from a midrash. It's coming from the tradition of parable, allegory, metaphor, and symbolism. And yet Rashi uses the drush to explain the simple meaning. So that itself is an amazing thing. That in Rashi's eyes, all 4 levels of Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, they're all woven together. And sometimes you need the drush or even the Sod to understand the simple meaning. That's what the Vilna Gaon said. The Sod, the secret mystical meaning, is the literal simple meaning. In other words, you can't separate from the literal and the mystical. So this is all an understanding of this idea of parable. And we're going to see it in the next week's parsha, in Balak, where the whole parsha, Bilam is talking in parables. He's in the end, they come out as blessings, even though he wanted to curse the Jews. But it's all given over in parable form. And to delve a little bit deeper into the concept of parable, so we see that there's one of the 24 books of the Bible, of the Tanakh, is called Mishlei. In English, we call it Proverbs. And Mishlei in Hebrew means Proverbs. And in the book of Kings, it says that Shlomo HaMelech composed 3,000 parables and 1,005 songs. So here, Shlomo HaMelech, who is considered the wisest of all people, he spoke in parables. 3,000 parables. What we have in the book of Proverbs is not all, we don't necessarily have all of them, but we do have one whole book of parables. Now, the root of the word for parable or proverb is mashal. That same word is the root of a ruler. And actually, the modern term for government comes from the same root, memshala, comes from this idea of mashal. So in other words, Solomon's wisdom and his ability to rule was because he was a master of proverbs. He was a master of being able to explain deep concepts in a way that people could understand. And in the book of Kings, it says that people quite literally came from all over the world. His reputation spread all over the world. And it said that kings and wise people from all over the world came to hear the wisdom of Shlomo that was given over in parable form. In the Talmud, there's a device that's used hundreds of times. There's a certain concept that one of the sages is trying to explain. And then it says, to what can this be compared? Lama ze domeh. What this concept I'm trying to give over, what can it be compared to? And then the sage gives over a simple, we'll call it even a folk parable to explain this concept. And this device is used for hundreds of times in the Talmud. When trying to explain different concepts, it's distilled into parable form. There's in the tractate of Bava Batra, there's a series of, they're called like fantasia stories, fantastic stories by a sage called Rabba Bar Chana. And these, the stories are wild. They're like way out imagination. And for thousands of years, people have been delving in to try to understand the symbolism in these, some people call them the exaggeration stories of Rabba Bar Chana. Now, what's interesting is we all know about Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, and his most classic book was Likutei Maharan. The first 15 Torahs in Likutei Maharan end by whatever Rabbi Nachman is giving over, and then he connects it to these 15 stories from Rabba Bar Chana. So like approximately 1800 years after Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov begins his classic work, Likutei Moharan, by probing into the symbolism of these exaggeration stories, and he finds incredible meaning in them. And I'll just mention as an aside that my wife took Rabbi Nachman's explanations of these stories, and she created a coloring book for children. And she put Rabbi Nachman's explanations into poetry form for, I don't know, children between 5 and 10. And it's a coloring book with the stories showing the pictures of the stories of Rabbi Bar Chana. Now, with the time that we have left, I want to explain one of the most incredible Rashis in the entire Torah. And this comes in Parshat Mishpatim. For those who want to follow this, it's on page 422. And in Parshat Mishpatim, for the first time, the idea of a city of refuge is explained. A city of refuge is when a person kills another person inadvertently, by mistake, but there's some a bit of carelessness there, but the person absolutely did not intend any harm to anyone. But through a bit of irresponsibility, someone is killed. And so they're given what's called a city of refuge that they have to go to. And it's introduced for the first time in the Parshat of Mishpatim. And it says like this, that it says that when someone kills inadvertently and God puts it into their hand, God is speaking here, I will give them a place to run to. So one verse. Later in the Torah, the cities of refuge are mentioned many, many times, and many laws about them and deeper meanings of what is a city of refuge. So the question is asked, everyone asks a question, what does it mean in the verse? This person kills inadvertently, and God put it into his hand, as if God somehow is pulling the strings here, that this happens through God's agency. So everyone asks, well, how do we understand this? So the Rashi, I'm going to say the second part of the Rashi first, and then the second part. So he explains, what does this mean? So Rashi says like this, and he's bringing a parable. And he says that there are two people. One person killed another person on purpose, but there were no witnesses, no one saw it, and he wasn't punished. There was no punishment. Another person killed not on purpose. Also, there were no witnesses, and nothing happened to him either. So Rashi says, so how does God, in a sense, run the world? So Rashi says, God invites these two people. In other words, he causes these two people to come to a hotel. The one who killed on purpose is sitting in a chair under a tree. The one who killed not on purpose, there's a ladder by the tree, and this person climbs up to, for whatever reason, to pick some fruit. He falls off the ladder onto the person who killed on purpose. He didn't mean to fall off the ladder, but he was a bit careless, and he did. He falls on the person who killed on purpose, but this time they're witnesses. So the one who killed on purpose is killed, because the Torah says if a person kills on purpose, there is what's called the death penalty, mot yumat. So now this person, God works it out that he is killed. And the one who falls off the ladder, who already killed someone inadvertently, this time they're witnesses, and he has to run to a city of refuge. So this is a parable that Rashi is telling us to explain how divine providence works in mysterious ways. We'll say it like that. It's an incredible parable. But how does Rashi begin? And this is, that is an amazing enough parable when we really delve into it and then apply it to all kinds of situations in our own lives, in history, things that we see around us. But Rashi begins like this, and he says, and I'm going to read it in English. Why should this go forth from him? Meaning that God brought about this whole situation where a person has to run to a city of refuge. This is what King David said. As the parable of the ancients says, from evil ones come evil. In other words, what's called a measure for measure. Even though sometimes we see evil people prospering and we see righteous people suffering, but actual evil only comes from evil people. Evil doesn't come from the righteous, and it doesn't come from God. And this is actually a verse in the book of Shmuel, the book of Samuel, that from evil ones comes evil. This is what King David said. But listen carefully. And he says, this is the parable of the ancients. So Rashi brings, and the ancient parable refers to the Torah. What is this ancient parable we're talking about? Rashi says it's the Torah itself. The Torah itself on one level is a parable, is a drush. Now I'll say that again. And the ancient parable refers to the Torah, which is the parable of God. The Torah is the parable of God, who is the ancient one of the world. Because remember, in the beginning, it said it's a parable of the ancient ones. So Rashi, like, who are these ancient ones? There's only one ancient one, and that is God. And then he introduces this whole story of the two men who are invited to the hotel. So here we see this an incredible understanding of the role of parable in the Torah itself. Parable, allegory, metaphor, symbolism. It's all interwoven in our understanding of the Torah, along with the literal, simple storyline of the Torah. They're all woven together. And that's why we say, Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 faces to the Torah. So this parsha, Chukat, there's so much to delve into. Here, we really just concentrated on the few times in the parsha that it mentions parable. And here I tried to expand it so we could see beyond that. And since I mentioned Rabbi Nachman, so at the end of Rabbi Nachman's life, he began to tell stories. And these stories became very, very famous. There have been scores and scores of books, whole books of commentary on these stories from Rabbi Nachman. And so Rabbi Nachman carries on this tradition of using parable and allegory to explain deep concepts and to reveal deep concepts, sometimes by actually hiding the concepts within stories. And Rabbi Nachman is the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov was famous for telling stories, parables. That's how he gathered so many of what are referred to the simple Jews, that he found a way to explain the deepest Kabbalistic concepts in the form of simple stories. And he gathered so many people and entranced so many people through his stories, and stories reach the heart. And of course, in our generation, we have one of the greatest storytellers in Reb Shlomo Carlebach. He used to sing his stories. He used to sing his stories, and they would just open up our hearts. That sometimes a story, a parable, a metaphor can reach so much deeper than a straightforward kind of explanation. So we should all be blessed to delve into the depths of the Torah.